The 2021 local government elections painted a picture of just how dissatisfied South Africans are with our political establishment. This showed in the number of votes lost by a number of political parties, key among them the African National Congress. Voter turnout also amplifying that story and the message sent there by the electorate that many simply had no real options, even in the opposition. Well, on the ground, many civil society organizations and active citizens are establishing movements that hope to drive the shift in the country's body politic. Well, that shift, as you can tell, is happening in the grassroots and across various platforms, such as the Rivonia Circle, led by my next guest, who's going to speak to us now, and about his efforts. I'm talking about Songezo Zibi, who is described lately as a public intellectual, but also a former editor of a very respected newspaper, including having done work in the private sector. Mr. Zibi, thank you very much for your time. Let's start with the Rivonia Circle. The understanding is that this is a think tank that was founded by yourself, and you lead it now with a group of other intellectuals. More importantly, talk to us about what its vision and mission is.
Thanks very much for having me, Toli. The Rivonia Circle is a think tank, but one with a difference. The purpose of the Rivonia Circle, when I co-founded it with my colleagues, was to make sure that we have the kind of fresh and forward-looking ideas that are going to take our country forward. It's really difficult to do that kind of work on the side of your desk. You need an institution in which you can acquire and house really smart people across generations and across competencies to engage themselves full-time with the work of rethinking the direction of the country and the kind of ideas we need to put on the table.
Yeah.
So that's what the Rivonia Circle does.
All right. Well, born out of those, let's call them discussions, dialogues, workshops, after many months of those, a new book has resulted out of that, and it is titled Manifesto. It's in my hand right here. Manifesto, a new vision for South Africa. In short, what is this book about? And just the title itself, does it say anything about the upcoming elections in 2024?
Thanks, Billy. So the book has had its own life, by the way, and should have been written or was supposed to be written in around 2016, 2017. And things were happening so fast during that time that every time I tried to write the book, it would soon be out of date because of the extent of the movement of things around Jacob Zuma, the motions of no confidence, the civil society upheavals and so on. And I wanted to make sure that I understand the meaning of all of those eruptions and incorporate them into the book.
Yeah.
The reason it is called Manifesto is because I wanted to produce a volume of work which is different to my first book, Raising the Bar, which was largely an analysis of what is wrong and what is possible, to spend a bit more time on the kind of things we need to do in order to get our country on the right path. So I deal with political reform, I deal with economic ideas, I deal with the fabric of society, I deal with social cohesion, I deal with questions of leadership and the role that the people that have been endowed and blessed with skill in this democracy, the professionals, should play increasingly in our public life in order to make sure we've got the capacity to produce the expected benefits of freedom.
Yeah, all right. And I want to latch on exactly what you have now just touched on, and that is the young professionals. You're calling on this grouping, and you are very specific that they've got to be younger than 50, and they have to become more involved in politics. Let's start with your view of this class, as you call them. You call them the professional class. Is it your view that they have become or are mere bystanders in the political life of this country?
Yes, I do, and for many reasons, including victimization, by the way, because having been someone who's participated in public discourse very actively and candidly for many, many years, I know the kind of perils that come with expressing your views in public. There are insults that are used. People are called clever blacks. They're called 702 blacks and so on, and there is no such in a democracy. In fact, we need a lot more people having their say in what should happen to the country, not just what's going wrong, but developing and promoting ideas that they believe will take the country forward. So for that and the degeneration of the political culture in political parties, where people take their pants off, they throw chairs at one another, there are fights over credentials for days on end, it's just an unseemly sight. A lot of people have decided that politics is not for them. Unfortunately, this is not an option in a democracy because it is a system of self-government. You need as many knowledgeable people as possible involved in politics so that you have a broad representation of South African life. In parliament and in provincial legislatures and councils, you need people who are social workers, who are nurses, who are engineers, who are accountants, economists, and so on, because the business of government is extremely complex and it's really, really important, especially where so many people are poor and unemployed. Every decision has to be the best decision we can make, and every outcome has to be as beneficial as possible to the South African people. So we need to get professionals back into active politics at all levels of our political system.
Well, let me challenge you a little bit there and say to you that you're absolutely correct that many of us, and I count myself among those professionals who basically are just mere bystanders. But some people are going to say, well, look, we have jobs to attend to. We have families to feed. I cannot, instead of coming to work, go on a protest over, I'm not sure, whatever it is that would not be working at that time. Let's say ESCOM, the constant load shedding. I need to, I guess, raise my concerns in a way that is going to be convenient for me to still do my daily duties. So what is it exactly that you are calling on this professional class, as you call them, to do exactly? How do they get their hands dirty?
So, Tony, one of the things we've convinced ourselves, wrongly so, is that politics is only through protest. It's not. Usually people protest because they feel they're not being listened to, they're not being heard, they're not being understood, and therefore they decide to protest. But what we need, and I propose in the book, is that we need to relook the set of rules that we have in our political and government institutions. I'll give you just two examples quickly for the benefit of the viewers. In Italy, not all the MPs are full-time MPs. Some of them are part-time. And they are highly skilled. In fact, I know one of them. He's a renowned economist, political economist. He works here in Pretoria, but he also attends parliamentary assignments in Italy. At least he did when the broad coalition was formed, when it was formed a few years ago. Why don't we create a system like that where it is possible for people to get time to do public service? When I was at Volkswagen, because that's one of the companies in which I worked, there was sports leave, and I believe it is still there. If you're participating in a national sporting event, you got a day or 2 days off. Dion Kaiser, the Springbok, was an employee. He didn't lose his job. The national service was recognized, and that was true whether you were in administration or whether you were participating as an athlete. If companies can do that in the context of sports and other things, why can't we do that for public institutions so that they function properly? After all, you're not going to have 20-30% of your employees participating in public service, but for that 3 to 5% who really are needed in the public service, why wouldn't you do it? The people to change the rules, unfortunately, also have to be the people with the knowledge of how to change the rules and what to change in the rules in order to deepen and make this democracy more effective.
What are the dangers of being mere bystanders?
We are becoming like Zimbabwe in this respect, and I know South Africans do not like this, but I'm sure all of us now know somebody who is not white, who has moved out of South Africa to go and work elsewhere. So what you find in countries which have had now weak economies weak governments and weak democracies is that there are no professionals, or there are very few professionals. You find them in South Africa, you find them in the United Kingdom, in France, in Belgium, in the United States, and so on. South Africans are becoming like that. We have to choose, because unlike Zimbabweans, we don't have a South Africa to go to. Where are we going to go? This is our country. It's endowed with lots of wealth and opportunity. What we are not doing is to step forward and make the kind of changes that are going to take it forward.
And why, Songezo, do you believe that this is the perfect moment to call on the middle class to show themselves and be participants in the life of the politics of this country? Why is this the perfect moment?
It's a perfect moment, unfortunately, for all the wrong reasons. So it is not possible for people who have the benefit of professional occupations or jobs, who then happen to be in the middle class, to shield themselves from the problems that poor people have had to shoulder alone and protest for so many years. When there is no electricity now, there's no electricity for everybody. If you're in Buffalo City and there is dirty water coming through the taps, there's dirty water coming through the taps for everybody. The potholes are affecting everybody. And the so-called black tax that we complain about, because we have to support a lot more of our relatives because they are unemployed, is a real thing too. Therefore, we have to make a choice. And I make an analogy in the book of a ship that is navigating rough seas. We are all in the ship. That ship is called South Africa. We cannot jump overboard, because if we do, we are outside of the ship and we're no longer South African. Therefore, we have to make a decision to save our own ship and to make sure that it is in safer waters and it's sailing towards prosperity. We can't do that without political involvement in different ways and at different levels.
Yeah. All right. So much of our discussion has been about what is contained in this book, and in particular your call to the middle class to get more involved in politics. But here's a question for a viewer who's wondering then, okay, so we're being called upon to participate more in the body politic of South Africa. Is the Rivonia Circle, which is the think tank that you have been running, now going to morph into a political party, into a movement? And that movement, we're going to discuss who's going to lead it, but where are we going with this, Songezo?
Tony, thank you. I'm glad you've asked the question. So one of the things we have to do in order to change South Africa's outlook and the political culture is to form institutions. The Rivonia Circle is a think tank. It will always remain a think tank, because you need to professionalize the production of ideas. You need to be able to hire or attract some of South Africa's best to come and work within an environment like that, so that they can do that without the pressure of having to chase votes. Because once you start chasing votes, you also start advocating crazy ideas, because you want to get elected after all. That's what populism is. And therefore, the Rivonia Circle is always going to be a non-profit company. In fact, at some point later on this year, we're hoping to get a public benefit organization status, because we also do a lot of civic education in our work. And the outcome of our work is going to be freely available to the public in order to deepen this democracy.
Yeah.
What has happened, though, in particular after Ferriel very naughtily said, I'm running for president, I am in trouble. People are asking to join a political party I do not have. But seriously, since the formation of the Rivonia Circle, and also since the publication of the book and the beginning of the publicity, what's become very clear, including our own research that we run before and we are currently running as I speak to you now this week and over the next coming weeks, is that people are looking for new alternatives. I think that explains the rise of Action SA, and it also explains the avalanche of messages I am now getting, seriously, on my email and on my phone to say we'll join a political party, because I think people recognize that we can't carry on like this, we have to carry on. I make a declaration in the book that having criticized professionals for not participating in public life. It would be disingenuous of me to then say, oh, I'm just a writer. You guys do it. Me, I'm just a writer. At least you've got an excuse for you're a journalist. You have to stay within certain bounds.
Exactly.
But I can't. I'm not a journalist anymore. So I have to be prepared to do the same things that I am asking other people to do. And therefore, I make this declaration because otherwise my book becomes illegitimate. And I'm saying in the book, we must be bold to want to do things and see ourselves as being fit to run this country, including the role of president. Even though we don't have presidential elections in South Africa, that's a mindset shift that we have to achieve. And I'm declaring in the book that I have made that mindset shift for myself. And if the opportunity were to come for me to lead, I wouldn't say, oh, no, I'm not good enough, I'm looking for other people. Because I'm saying we've got lots of people who are good enough. And I believe I'm one of them. And we need to start betting on ourselves and not on these people that we criticize and we don't think much of.
Yeah. All right. Now that you've made that declaration that if that opportunity presents itself, you'll put up your hand and say, I'm ready to lead, provided the electoral system allows. You say in the book, interestingly, that not everyone can run for office and there needs to be a criteria. What should be the criteria for identifying a president?
I think the criteria I refer to in the book, Tol, is not so much the criteria for the president specifically, but it's for roles in the public service. Philosophically, I believe that parliament and councils and provincial legislatures need to be a fair representation of South African life. You need to have somebody who was a security guard, somebody who was a nurse, somebody who was a cleaner, all the way to somebody who is an economist, who is an accountant, who was a bookkeeper, and so on. The reason I'm saying political parties must take care to make sure there is a broad representation of skills and life experiences is so that these public institutions don't suffer from two things. One, detachment from the realities of South African life and governing, and secondly, an inability to extract accountability out of these bodies are supposed to hold accountable. It's not a laughing matter when Eskom's executives a few years ago were able to run rings around MPs because they were better equipped in terms of the knowledge than the MPs. This democracy and the people will benefit more when amongst our MPs and other elected representatives we have a fair representation of the South African life experience.
Yeah. Two critical questions, Songezo, before we conclude our conversation. The one, I want to think that you've already made that mind shift in people's heads, that perhaps you are indeed in the near future going to launch a political outfit. That means then that you've made peace with the fact that politicians and people like me, journalists, are going to start digging into your personal space, and you know the mudslinging that comes with that. So declare here and now whether there are any juicy things about your personal life, and if indeed you do, make that declaration here and now, sir.
What I do know is that I don't have a couple of $1 million under my neck. But one of the things I say in the book is that we don't have saints, and there's a tendency to look for perfect politicians who represent a perfect politics with perfect personalities and a perfect everything. Now, I'm certain there are lots of people that I've met in my life who don't like me for one or other reason. And one day they'll step up and say, we don't like that guy because he once did this to me. What I'm asking for, though, is that we strive to follow what Madiba said, which is a saint is a sinner who keeps trying. All we need to do is to strive to always do the right thing. And when we are elected to public office, we respect the public enough to always strive to do the right thing and to be as transparent as possible. Yeah. As Barack Obama says, people who believe in social justice are also messy in that they are rude, they are crude, they might even represent some other views that we don't agree with. So we must stop looking for perfect politicians, but we must look for politicians who are sincere in what they do and they are open to being corrected.
Yeah. Final question. If South Africans are going to believe in the movement or the political outfit that you might start in the near future, they obviously are going to start being inquisitive about who is funding you and what might their motives be for funding you. Have you started receiving calls for those who want to donate generously?
So you know, Toli, there are two very important principles to this question, by the way, and I'm glad you've asked the question. One of the things we're going to do, even in the context of the think tank, as soon as we've established the infrastructure and the governance behind the scenes, is to ask for crowdfunding. South Africans need to start making small donations to things they believe in. It's really important. We don't have that culture. So what happens is you don't have people making small donations, and often there is no infrastructure for them to do that. And then on the other hand, people have a problem with donor funding. We can't have it both ways. Nationally important work requires funding. So one of our commitments at Rivonia Circle is that as far as possible and within reason, we will not ask people to make a financial sacrifice in order to join us as researchers and so on. They need to be able to live and support their families. That requires funding. That question about who's funding you is usually used in the South African context to attempt to delegitimize people. To say, because you're getting funding from XYZ, we don't believe you're sincere. And I don't think that's a correct thing to do. What's important, though, is that we need to follow the law. If the law says you disclose your funding, if you are a political party, then you need to disclose your funding. And I see some political parties which like to criticize others for who's funding them, don't themselves declare who's funding them, which means it's a hypocritical question. And frankly, I tend to have little patience for it when people weaponize that question.
Songezo Zibi, let's leave it there. Thank you very much. The question is, South Africans, if you have been listening to this conversation, would you vote for Songezo Zibi if indeed that opportunity arose? Let's leave it there.